Rabbi Reuven Vershuvsky's story is one of heroism, courage, faith and resilience in the face of extreme hardship and unrelenting challenges. Hear him describe how he survived behind the Iron Curtain and emerged with his connection to Hashem and His Torah stronger than ever.
Another activity that I was involved in was traveling. And it partially has to do with the fact that I love to travel more than my friends at that time. I was in university, today it's called Moscow State University of Railways Engineering. We had official railways uniform that we had to wear, and we had official ID of Ministry of Railways Communications. That made it easier for me to travel. Anyway, I had to invent a way to be excused on Shabbosim. So I had to invent a way to get medical excuse. I learned how to fake hypertension, high blood pressure, and almost every week I would have a blood pressure going up and a letter from a doctor, their doctor. The university had its own doctors that they accepted only papers from them. So anyway, I had already a way to get excused from coming to classes on some days. It made it easier for me to travel. The reason for travel was to make more friends. And I felt like we in Moscow, we have the luxury of foreigners. Once a month we had a foreigner, or twice a month we had a Fruma Yid, a Balabos or a Rov from London or from New York or from Baltimore, from Yerushalayim, visiting Moscow. And we have more Tashmishi Gdusha and Sforim and learning groups. You go to Kiev and as opposed to 300 Moscow Bali Chuvas, you have 8 or 10 Bali Chuvas in Kiev, and they don't have that access to foreigners, to Sforim, to Tashmishi Gdusha. They don't know anything or almost anything. You go to Odessa, you have three from people, and they need to know. They need those 3 families. Their women had to go to mikveh. They need to know Taras Mishpacha Dinim. And they have kids that go to public schools and they need to hear about Yiddishkeit. Or they have people trying to be niskarev to Yiddishkeit. So I traveled when I had an opportunity. I traveled to Kiev, to Odessa, to Khmelnytsky, to Belce, different places where I felt I am needed. Just because I'm from Moscow and we in Moscow have more opportunities to learn, I felt like I'm doing a big thing going to some places in Ukraine, and when I can teach, great, or at least to have some contacts, to be friends with them, to help them establish connection with a bigger community in Moscow, underground community in Moscow. Once I was asked by a couple that was married for many years, over 20 years, but they wanted Chuppah and Kedushin. They asked me to be Mesader Kedushin. But for Kedushin you need kosher Eidim and you need a minyan. How you get a minyan in a private apartment for underground activity in Kiev? If there are, altogether there are like 8-9 from people. I had to go to all Hebrew teachers. There were 3 or 4 Hebrew teachers in Kiev. To people that would come to shul, younger people that would come to shul and wouldn't be afraid to come as part of underground minyan in a private apartment. And to contact them and tell them that we have a chasana, a chuppah, tomorrow at 3 o'clock, I had to go to their apartments. We didn't trust a telephone for a good reason. It was taped, all our conversations on the phone. I would leave the apartment, stop a taxi on the street, few blocks away from where I lived, tell the taxi driver an address few blocks away from where I wanted to go, leave the taxi, walk 2 blocks, ring the bell in the apartment, and when they answer through the door, before opening the door, that was custom in Russia, before you open the door, you ask who is there. They would ask me who is there. I would say, regards from Tante Traile. Something that sounds Jewish. Tante Traile never existed, but they felt like somebody Jewish is on the other side of the door. They would open the door. And I would write on a piece of paper, tomorrow, 3 o'clock, you are needed for a minyan, for a chuppah, at this address. He would nod. I would tell him how Tante Traile is feeling, and leave, walk a couple of blocks, take a taxi, go to another location, and that evening I covered like 8 different addresses, inviting people tomorrow to the Hasana. What I didn't understand is how KGB is watching me, and in Moscow I felt like who I am. I'm one of 300. I'm not the biggest leader. If they want to arrest, and after Brezhnev died in 1982, Andropov came to power. He was, before that, he was the chief of KGB. When he became the head of Soviet Union, General Secretary of Politburo, he brought his approach to solving problems as a KGB chief. See, the first thing he did was tightening the screws, and it became harder to live in the Soviet Union. The KGB control was more strict. The whole life became more strict. And still in Moscow, I was one in a crowd. I didn't realize when I was coming to Kiev or Odessa, I was one of few, and I was the most dangerous person because I came from Moscow. And they didn't know exactly why I came. The only thing they knew that I came and I'm meeting with people that are on their blacklist. When I got married, it continued on. I still was coming to, especially my wife was from Kiev, and even more connection to Kiev, and further to Odessa, to Khmelnytsky, to other places in Ukraine. All those drivers wrote reports. I picked up the object. At this address, I took the object, meaning me, to that address. At that time, he walked by foot to that address, exact times with minutes, hours and minutes. The object entered the entrance. And then another taxi I took from there was a different taxi, but same style report. Object was picked up, object was delivered, everything was recorded. The only problem was they didn't know what it is. I'm visiting all people on their blacklist and they don't know what's going on. They decided to arrest me. Next morning I come to shul to daven, finish davening, exit the shul. The shul in Podol in Kiev, Shikovitskaya ulica. I exit the gates of the shul. I was grabbed from both sides. Two strong men grabbed me from both sides, threw me into a car, that the door was open before I threw me into a car, slammed the doors, got into the car, slammed the doors, started moving, and only then they asked me for my name and my papers, my passport. That's how I was arrested. After many hours, that night, late at night, they decided to incriminate me with the stealing of Sforim from Kiev shul. They didn't have it in mind. It didn't cause the fact that I had in my apartment in Moscow, I had hundreds of Sforim from other shuls, also from Kiev, but from Riga, from Moscow, Archipel, Moscow, Marina Rossa. They didn't know that. They needed something to make it a criminal case, not political. That was the issue. So some people they arrested and they planted drugs with them. One person was arrested, they planted a gun in his apartment and munition. And I was lucky. They incriminated me only stealing Sforim from Kiev shul. Not drugs, not weapons. Also, I figured out later that was an action of Kiev KGB, Ukrainian KGB, for some inside political reasons between the KGB in Ukraine and KGB in Moscow. They didn't want to ask permission from Moscow KGB to arrest me. They didn't inform Moscow KGB. It was their action. So when they asked me for my Moscow address, I said I forgot. And they didn't do anything to me. They didn't start torturing me to make me remember my Moscow address. There was an article in Вечерний Kiev, the main Kiev newspaper, about me, saying that I am the head of a gang that smuggles Jewish Sforim, Jewish books out of Soviet Union, making money on it, and they mentioned other names, and surely other people were also, after the article came out, other people their apartments were searched, and they were in trouble. But that came about after they decided to arrest me. And in that article it was written that Vershuvsky, being a computer programmer in Moscow, a person working with numbers and formulas and programming, he forgot his home address. So that was the fact that I refused to answer, give them my home address, was mentioned in the newspaper article. But they didn't know what I am here for. So they decided to arrest me, and then when they interrogated me in the first 24 hours, they decided that they're giving me a prison term. After they threw me into a car, they took me to KGB headquarters, and after initial interrogation that took 4 or 5 hours, they put me in cell in the basement. It was February, was very cold, and they had in the basement, they had only 4 cells. The last cell was called, among the prisoners, I learned it later, it was called the freezer. All the cameras, camera is in Russian, cell. All the cells were not, had no heating. And there is a way to build cells without insulation. So not only they were heated, there wasn't any insulation, and the last one was the coldest. So they put me for a night in that coldest cell. Baruch Hashem, when they arrested me, I had a very good coat on me. They didn't take it away. So I spent the night in a very cold cell, but at least I had my coat on. When I woke up, my coat was frozen to the bunk that I was sleeping on. But Baruch Hashem, I made out alive. That was the beginning of my term. This was the beginning of my time in jail. The interrogation, there was official part of interrogation with a police major interrogating, and there was a KGB part, unofficial. They wanted me to cooperate. They wanted me as an informer. And I said that I cannot, being a Shomer Torah mitzvahs, I cannot do it, because there is a prohibition in Torah to speak bad about another Jew. So you asking me for something like eat pork or desecrate Shabbos, I can't do it. It's not gonna happen. So then they said, if you're not cooperating, you'll get 8 years in jail, and when you get out, your wife will be that old, and you will be handicapped if you ever make it alive out of Russian jail after 8 years. You will be broken and ruined, and I said, it's out of my hands. I can't do it, and nothing to talk about. In reality, they tried to give me 8 years. Baruch Hashem, some diplomatic efforts worked, and the sentence was reduced in court from 8 years to 2 years. There was a diplomatic effort that went through. There was a person from Zurich who was in Moscow on his way to China dealing computers or something. He stopped in Moscow, and that was his second time in Moscow. He visited my friends, and they told him that I am in jail, that one of the friends is arrested. On his way back, he contacted other people. The Manchester Rov, at the time, he's based in London, Reb Hannah Ehrentreu, Rabbi Ehrentreu, Dayan Ehrentreu, contacted the chief rabbi, Lord Jacobowitz, who gave, in turn, he gave the list of Jewish prisoners to Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher gave that list to Gorbachev's aides. When Gorbachev made his first visit to London, he wasn't yet the head of state, he wasn't general secretary. He was a member of Politburo, and he was the youngest member of Politburo. He was in London, he met with Margaret Thatcher, and he was given that list with all Jewish prisoners of conscience. And I was on that list. And she asked for the release of all of them, and they answered, no, we cannot release them, but we will do something for each of them. They will get smaller sentences, or they will be transferred from higher security to lower security prisons. And they did that. In my case, it worked that the Attorney General of Soviet Union wrote a letter. That letter was in my file, in my case. Wrote a letter to Ukraine Attorney General asking to reduce my sentence. And then Attorney General of Ukraine giving order to prosecution in my case. They lowered what they were asking from judges, from court. And in Russia, in political cases, wherever the prosecution asks, that's what the court gives, the sentence. So once the prosecution dropped request for 8 years and requested 2 years in prison, the court gave me that sentence. When KGB people, they decided to incriminate me with the stealing of Sforim from Kiev Shul, they had to bring some evidence. They brought the Gabbai, whom I knew that he was an old Musar from Stalin's times. People knew that about him. They brought him and they told him what to say, and he said, for the record, that I asked him for permission to take this Sforim, and he did not give me that permission, and later he found that Sforim from one of the bookshelves missing. And that was the base for the case. The Sforim that they found with me, and why that idea altogether, why they decided to incriminate me with the stealing of the books, because when they arrested me, when I was coming out of the shul, in my briefcase were 4 or 5 Sforim. A Siddur, a Chumash, a Chayei Adam, something else. Those Sforim were not from Kiev Shul. They were, if I remember correctly, they were from Riga Shul. My friend gave them to me, and I took them with me to Kiev for my personal use. But I took a lot of Sforim from Kiev Shul also. Those 4 were not from those that I took. We all took from different shuls and then used and distributed old Sforim. That wasn't important. They needed some criminal charge, and they came up with the criminal charge of stealing Sforim from Kiev Shul. They brought the Gabbai to testify, and that was and they had to make forensic expertise that those Sforim worth a lot of money, and they sent those Sforim to Christian Orthodox monastery for forensics. And I saw a paper that the first forensic came back saying that those Sforim worth 50 rubles, but that wasn't enough to incriminate, wasn't good enough, was sent back. And the second time, the same people, a day later, wrote that the Sforim worth 400 rubles. And that was enough to start the criminal case.